Hi friends, today we are making whole wheat bread, and the recipe that I found, it for some reason just clicked with me, although I have not made this particular recipe before. So it will be an experiment, and this recipe is supposed to be a really soft and nice whole wheat recipe, but it takes a few ingredients that not all whole wheat recipes take, and it also requires making a sponge. I don't always make a sponge when I make bread, but I'm going to do it this time because I really like to see how it goes. So my first course of action is to make the sponge, and a note on this recipe, I will link it below. And let me just tell you the description of the loaf in case you would like to know. You just need 8 simple ingredients to make this whole wheat sandwich bread. It's soft yet hearty and oh so flavorful, and store-bought sandwich bread just doesn't compare. You can use 100% whole wheat flour, or you can swap in some bread flour for a taller, fluffier loaf. And I will be swapping out 1 cup per recipe of King Arthur flour because this is the first time I've made bread in a very long time, and I would like to be having a successful loaf come out. And then I will be working to get all whole wheat in the next ones. So the sponge takes 1 cup of water warmed to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 1/3 cup of whole milk warmed to about 110 as well. I will be using coconut milk in this recipe. 2 1/4 teaspoons of active dry or instant yeast. I will be using active dry or 1 standard packet. 2 cups of whole wheat flour, and that is what makes the sponge. Let's get going. First things first, I will be putting on this apron that Greg's aunt got me. It actually is from a bakery in San Francisco, I believe, and it features information all about sourdough bread. I would like to learn how to make sourdough bread. I was just talking to a friend of mine over the weekend, and that is a realm that I have not dove into yet, but that is on my list of skills that I would like to learn. We're starting out with by the way, I am going to double this loaf because this recipe makes 1 loaf of bread and I would like to make 2. So I will link the recipe for you. Just know that my measurements are doubled. Okay, I've got 2/3 of a cup of coconut milk, and it is warmed to 110 degrees. So that's what I'm starting out with. And then I'm going to be putting 2 cups of water, also warmed to 110 degrees. I measured a few minutes ago, and I already know that the water coming out of my tap, which is well water, at the hottest is 110 degrees because that is what we have our instant hot water heater set to, but I verified it with a candy thermometer earlier. So I've got the water and the milk. Now I'm going to put in 2 1/4 teaspoons, or let's see, it's going to be doubled, so I'm going to put in 4 1/2 teaspoons of my yeast. Okay, now I am going to put in 4 cups of whole wheat flour. Now, I have bought a lot of King Arthur flour in bulk, and that is what I am using. It is King Arthur whole wheat flour. I'm using up what I have bought at the store before I use the bulk stuff. You technically are supposed to spoon your flour instead of scoop it to make sure that it's a little bit more fluffy. If you've ever seen me cook before, you know that I usually cook kind of with a broad interpretation of recipes, but not when I make bread. You kind of have to have it like you're supposed to. Okay, so for the sponge, that's all it takes. It takes those 4 ingredients, and then you're supposed to stir it until a thick batter forms, and then I'm going to cover it lightly. So this is gonna, once I mix this up, it's gonna sit for 60 to 90 minutes. So this is way different than just mixing up your yeast and water and sugar like a lot of times when you make bread. This is pretty stiff. Okay, the notes on the recipe say that they don't actually recommend that you use a mixer for making your sponge because the dough is so thick and heavy in your sponge, so it's best to mix it by hand. The other components of the recipe, once we start adding the rest of the flour, that often can be mixed in a mixer like my lost Bosch. I really miss that thing. It's not like permanently lost, it's just lost for now. Okay, that's our sponge. 60 to 90 minutes. We want to let it double in size at room temperature. Cover. Okay, rather than cover this with saran wrap, which I totally can do, since I'm using this big flat bowl, I'd have to use like 2 pieces and then it's not going to match. So I'm using this giant bowl to cover it. And it just says room temperature. It doesn't really say you have to put it in the warmest spot. So I'm just going to leave it right here. And I'm going to tell you what the recipe says about why you want to make a sponge when maybe you wouldn't normally have made a sponge. Okay, I just found out because I didn't read all the way to the end. I read through the recipe, but I didn't read to the end of the notes on the recipe, and it says if you want to double it, it's best to make it in 2 separate recipes because it is so heavy and because the sponge takes so long to rise. So I just shot myself in the foot there. We're gonna just keep going with it. Yeah, we're gonna see how it goes. I may kick myself for attempting this, especially as I doubled it. Let me tell you a couple of the recipe notes that I found very interesting and important. So later on in the recipe, we're going to be using lemon juice, and most breads that I've ever made, actually I've never made a bread with lemon juice in it. So because we are sticking to whole wheat bread, sometimes the whole wheat has a slight bitterness to it, and so according to the person who made this recipe, lemon can counteract that flavor, the bitter flavor, and improve the flavor. So we're all about that, and it just takes a little bit. Said if you don't have lemon juice, you can use apple cider vinegar. They recommend fresh lemon juice. I don't have any fresh lemon, so I'm using it out of a bottle. The reason why they recommend making a sponge and why this recipe takes a sponge is because this extra added step improves the flavor and the texture. And the person who made this recipe said that it gives it a more complex flavor and a lighter texture. So I'm gonna just believe her because like I said, it's been a long time since I've made bread. And she also recommends using milk. She recommends using whole milk. I cook plant-based, and so I used coconut milk, but she recommended the milk because it improves the texture. It also helps a little bit with the flavor, but she said the fat in the milk really improves the texture. And so I used a coconut milk, which generally does have some fat in it, and she said if you're going to be using milk, it's best if you use whole milk just for that added improvement of texture. So other than that, I think it's pretty straightforward. We're just gonna sit here for an hour and a half and let this thing rise, and I have plenty of things that I can do while that's happening. Here's that big bowl. Let's take a peek under it. So this is essentially the before and how large the sponge is in the bowl, and that is going to be good to know because we need to know if it doubles. Since my honey turned to rock, I have to melt it a little bit in this warm water. I'm not going to use my big oven because we are in 90-degree days here in August in Upper East Tennessee, and the house just gets so hot. So we've given this stove, beautiful Betty here, a rest for the summer, and I purchased this nice countertop oven, but this is the first time that I'm going to try to bake bread in it. And my main concern is, will I have enough space? Because it's pretty big and wide. It can hold a 9x13 pan, but my question is, will I have enough space this way? And so definitely my bread pans fit in there, and my favorite bread pan actually is my cast iron one, and it is the same height. It's a little bit narrower, and so I think that what I may do is, because I could move this rack down, but it is so close to the coils that I really don't want to risk burning the bottom of it, and I really don't want to risk making it go too high because the coils are on the top too. So I think what I'm probably going to have to be satisfied with is making smaller loaves, dividing it probably into, instead of 2 loaves, I'll divide it into 3 and space that over 3 loaf pans if I can fit them in there. If I had another cast iron pan, I could definitely fit it, but I don't think my big pans will fit. We're gonna have to see what I do. I may just have to make some rolls or something. And while I would love to have this be big, fluffy sandwich bread, my constraints with the size are probably gonna make them smaller loaves. It's the moment of truth. It's been probably about an hour and 15 minutes. Time to check the sponge. I'm pretty sure that's double. It looks pretty double, don't you think? Poke it. Now, next we get to make the dough. For the dough, we're going to add these ingredients. For one recipe, we're going to add 3 tablespoons of honey, 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I don't have any unsalted butter, so I'm using salted. Earth balance. 1 teaspoon of fresh lemon juice or apple cider vinegar, 1 1/3 cups of whole wheat flour, plus more as needed, 1 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Okay, so I'm doubling all that, and let's go to it. 6 tablespoons of honey. There we go. It smells delicious. We never take our honey for granted. Don't you know it takes like 42,000 trips to the flour to make a teaspoon of honey? Something like that. I'm using Earth Balance because it's plant-based. And it's been sitting here for a good long time, softening. So 6 tablespoons of that. That's 2 teaspoons of lemon juice. So 2.5 teaspoons of salt. 1, 2 1/2 teaspoons of salt, 2 2/3 of flour cups, and I am going to use 1 cup of white flour, and then the rest is going to be whole wheat, and 2/3. Okay. And this would be the point where it would be nice to have my Bosch mixer, because then I would mix it for 3 minutes. But I can use a spatula or a wooden spoon and some arm muscle and beat it until it comes together and pulls away from the sides of the bowl. In a mixer, this would be 3 minutes. With me, it'd probably be about 10. Because this is some stiff dough. I just don't think it's going to work with this spoon. I'm just going to have to do it with my hands. It's too stiff. You can see the dough is starting to come together, but it's going to need a lot of kneading because it's really dry. But my goal is to get all this flour incorporated, and then I have to knead it like, usual, till it becomes elastic. Now the recipe says you can add more flour if your dough is a little sticky so that it's easy to knead. I don't feel like I need to add any more flour. This dough is not really that sticky at all. So I'm just going to knead this for, it recommends 8 to 10 minutes in the bread mixer, or 8 to 10 minutes of kneading until it becomes very elastic. So I will spare you all that. And I want to say that I do believe that the person who said don't double it because it would be hard to knead, that was true. I ended up dividing this into 3 groups, and it made it a lot easier to work with. And just as a refresher, the purpose of kneading is because we're stretching the dough, we're getting the gluten developed. And so as it gets developed, instead of having those pieces that easily break that are short, we're trying to make it grow long. And so it looks like I have, even though this dough had been really worked quite a bit, it has a long ways to go until it passes the window pane test. And it looks like I'm going to be kneading for a good long while. This is a pretty good workout for your arms and shoulders. This is hard work, and I've been doing it probably for longer than the average person would be because I need to beef up my game. But this is the last third of the dough, and I think it's looking pretty good. I've got the other 2 balls in an oiled bowl rising, and now this is going to also go in that same bowl. So I have the bowl and it's covered with oil, and so I take the ball of dough and I make sure that I coat it with some oil, and this is just a little bit of olive oil. You just don't want it to dry out, so you want to coat your ball with oil and then just set it aside in the bowl to rise, and it's supposed to rise for 1.5 to 2 hours. So this is a long process. It's not going to happen in a super short period of time. So I'm going to cover this up. I am going to take it out to the sunroom again because it's nice and warm out there, and it will have a nice time to just sit in the bowl and rise. There is something about baking bread. It is a relaxing process. It is a slow process. And I don't just mean slow in that it takes so long. It's kind of a slow way of living. It's getting back to the basics, getting our hands in and doing something, creating something with our hands that we often don't take the time to do. It's very rewarding to make something yourself. And even though it's super tempting to just pitch it in a bread machine, and that's very satisfying too. There's something when you go through a lot of hard work, like kneading the bread, for a long time. I kneaded the bread for probably 30 to 40 minutes. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how it comes out. It's just sometimes the lessons are in the progress. And I think that is something that we need more of. We outsource so many things. We don't do things for ourselves anymore. We're out the door, here, there, on this project, other projects, and we're the worst for that because we are always so involved. But I'm just really thankful to be able to take the time to do this. It's been so long. It's an enjoyable process. I recommend it. It's been probably an hour, certainly not 2. Let's just check in on it. It's looking pretty big. Let me double check to see. When it's doubled in size, take it out, shape it into loaves, and then cover it up after you've put it in the pan and set it aside till it's a little bit over an inch above the edge of your pan. Okay, my loaves are ready to go in, and I'm really facing a dilemma because I'm just afraid that no matter where I put it in this small oven, it's either going to be too close to the burner on the bottom or the coils on the top. And so I really don't want to have them burn on the top or bottom. So I'm going to have to play around with it, see where the best place is. Yeah. If I put it in here at top, it's going to be too close. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it between the coils, but I'm only going to do one at a time. We'll give it a try. This could be a exercise in folly by putting it in this toaster oven, this convection oven. I could put it at the bottom, but it's awfully close to the coils if I put it on that bottom rack. So this will be an experimental baking. Aside from this loaf, which looked funny going in and looked funny coming out, it came out really well. It was sliced up really nice, and now it's time to tell the truth. They say the proof is in the pudding. Well, in this case, in the eating of the bread. Let's try it. This is a piece that I've cut. I always have a hard time getting my slices straight. And so, yeah, by the end, I usually have a wedge. But this is slightly toasted and has some earth balance spread on it. The bread is really good. It is substantial, but it's not heavy. And when you bite it, there's a lot to bite. And it's good. It has a good flavor. I was trying to compare it while I was chewing it to other wheat breads that I've had. And this one is just really good. I think it does have kind of a deep flavor to it. And maybe that's because of the butter. I don't really know. I would make it again. I feel like I need to do some tweaks to, my practices. I need to brush up on my practices. But yeah, I would definitely make this recipe and give it another shot. I think that next time I will, I don't know. Next time I just may not be able to do it in my toaster oven because it just took too long. It took too much energy to do 3 separate loaves because I could not put them all side by side because of fear of burning either at the top or the bottom. So there's that I don't really recommend making bread in your toaster oven because of the space issue. You want a large loaf, and I would have loved to have made this into 2 large loaves instead of 3 small ones. Then my bread would have been way bigger. But it's really delicious, and we knocked out half a loaf the first meal and almost the rest of that loaf this meal. And so everybody likes it, and that's what's important.